artists never value their demos as much as they should, in my opinion. The demo is the first time you record a song, the very first time you lay it down. When you're creating in that moment, before it's ever been done, there's a magic and an excitement or an enthusiasm that just doesn't exist when you reperform it. And anybody who's ever sang a song 7 times, by the 6th and 7th time, you're trying to get this thing over with. And the people guys who are confident in their ability to either sing or play guitar or whatever, they know once they're done it 2 or 3 times, the best has already happened. And a lot of times, the first time has a raw excitement or magic that's unmatched. Anybody who's ever recorded in a studio with a band, and if you happen to be the singer, then you really know what I'm talking about. Many times, what will happen is a band goes in to play their bunch of songs. The singer, if he's never recorded before, so the very first time a singer has maybe been in the studio recording, the singer will belt out every song singing into basically a mic that's considered the scratch vocal mic in the control room while the band is in the live room recording, or maybe the drummer's the only one in the live room. Everyone else is in the control room looking at the drummer. I mean, there's a million ways to do it, but what will happen is the singer puts it all on the line during day one when the drums are being recorded, and that's the focus. The singer's not in the booth. They're just kind of giving it their all that very first day. Now, what a lot of engineers have realized and producers have realized is that there's a magic that happens when people don't think that for whatever reason, this is the keeper takes. These are the final vocals that are going to be, naked for everyone to see at the final, on the final mix for everyone that's going to be released. People are more free to be themselves when they think the camera's not rolling. That's why it's very hard to truly be yourself on camera. It takes a certain type of person to let go. That's why it's so hard to be an actor. It's not easy. People think it's easy until they try doing it, and then they realize how hard it is. Because as soon as it's obvious the eyes are on you, people tend to act a little different. They don't act the way they typically would. They don't speak the way they typically would. Things just all kind of come into play in their mind, everything they're doing. There's a great scene in 30 Rock where Alec Baldwin he's like doing a commercial, and he's like, I feel weird. What do I do with my hands? Give me a mug. So he's holding a coffee mug, and then he's like, it still feels weird. Give me another mug. So he's holding 2 coffee mugs while he's doing this commercial. It's hilarious. It's one of the best scenes ever. It's a brilliantly written show. But anyway, let's move away from that. Your demos. There's a number of times in history where guys have not been able to beat their demo. I bet you this happens all the time with people who aren't signed to labels, who don't have, a following. This happens all the time. Every person who's ever recorded in their bedroom, you may have the greatest demo that you discount because maybe you think, the mic wasn't good enough. You didn't spend enough time. You could do it better. You always think you could do it better. But guys who have confidence, the more confidence you build up, the more you realize you may not actually be able to do it better. It might be different. You might have more emphasis on some word, phrase, line, or whatever, but that's not the point. There's a magic that's created because you're doing it the first time. Stuart Copeland has a great line that I believe he told Greg Wells, because Greg Wells originally was signed to a label by Stuart Copeland's older brother, Miles Copeland. And he got signed to this label based on a bunch of these 8-track demos that Greg Wells had made. That's how he got signed to this label. The label eventually went bankrupt because they released a Peter Frampton album that nobody bought, and it bankrupted the label. But what wound up happening in this particular situation was Greg, after he recorded his demos, which he got signed on, he felt they weren't sonically good enough. That's what people, maybe we could do better sonically. So he re-recorded everything. And then somebody honest with him was like, these aren't as good. The demos are better. Like, the sound quality isn't as good on the demo, but it's a better performance. Everything this has a vibe, and this other stuff that you redid doesn't. So, Stuart Copeland at that point said something amazing to Greg Wells. He goes, "You know, recreating is not the same thing as creating." So trying to do things again will very often paint you into a corner where you're trying too hard. You're pushing too hard. You're not who you think you are. You're a bad actor, essentially. You're not conveying what you could be conveying on that very first time where imperfections were on a 10, maybe, where the sound quality was worse, where it wasn't recorded in the ideal room with the ideal mic and the preamp and the compressor that you might want, and it doesn't matter. None of that stuff matters. Rough mixes are very often not able to be beaten. The more you seek out these kind of stories, because that's the best part about where we live in time today, you could literally find stories about everything, and it's free. So anytime I ever hear anyone who says something like YouTube is such a waste of time, or it's like, you don't value information if you feel that way, because the information is out there, the tales behind all these stories, and it's all free. It's literally anybody can find this stuff out. You will find more often than not that a demo or a rough mix is something that, producers will say, don't fall in love with this. Please don't fall in love with this because of a number of reasons. If I'm Greg Wells, I got on a real Greg Wells kick recently, and he had a great interview with Joe Ciccarelli where they were talking about this stuff, and they're like, they were remembering something they had done for Rufus Wainwright on Across the Universe, and they basically were talking about how on this rough mix that they put together, they had hired a string section for thousands of dollars, and on this rough mix, that Joe Ciccarelli had made kind of passively just to give them something to go home with. Like, the string section maybe wasn't loud enough. A lot of things Joe did in that rough mix were amazing, and this is a session that Greg Wells was producer on. And, that basically Greg said, "Don't fall in love with this because that string section, I can barely hear it. The string section we paid all this money for, I can barely hear it." And there's no automation on this console, and he was using like a Soundcraft console in his, studio that is one of the first mixes or something he'd ever mixed in his new studio. So he just wasn't, the whole thing was like, we could do better than this. Don't fall in love with this. And they tried to do better. And Rufus wound up always wanting that sound of the rough mix, where eventually Greg just came out and said it. Hey, it sounds like you're trying to, revise the new mix we gave you into that rough. And Rufus said, basically Greg said, "Do you want us to just use the rough?" And Rufus said, "Yes." And that song wound up being it wound up being a Rufus Wainwright hit. It's charted on Billboard, and it got him a lot of different accolades. And this is a very common theme. It's not always possible to recreate magic. And I've said this in a couple videos recently, where what we do is harness magic. We're sorcerers out here, and our job is to get out of the way of the magic. And as soon as you think that you can do better, you are really trying to grasp hold and control and steer what you're doing into what you want it to be. I got news. It's already something that it wants to be. And the first time you did it, you already did that. You steered it. So why try to recreate it? Something better to do, in my opinion, could be to try to bring that up. What they wound up doing was, let's get that rough mix mastered and see if you like it then. And if you do, we'll release it. And if not, not. And they wound up keeping it, and it was released. Consider that. Consider that, maybe it's great. It just needs a little more low end. You could do it in mastering. Use the mix you already have. Consider that. If you still have the session, maybe you could, either you try to remix it or hire somebody to see if they could do better, but always compare it to that original, and if it's not better, don't try and don't be like, "Oh, we can make it better if make 100 tweaks and 100 revisions." Just realize there was a magic there and give into it. Give yourself into the idea, like, just give up to the fact that you might be good enough where you already captured and did the job. You just trying to redo it is only making it worse. Digging a hole for yourself, it's impossible to get out of. So, if I could do one thing for a lot of you guys out there, it would be give yourself more of the benefit of the doubt. Give yourself a little credit for the fact that you might have already got it nailed. It's possible. And every time you revise, every time you try to do it again, every time you want to re-record, it could be a disaster. And you could be sucking out the vibe of it in pursuit of perfection. And that's never going to go well, because unless you got somebody who's going to tell you, you know, I'm just coming in as an outside ear and comparing these two, this one that sonically sounds way worse is so much better. You know, we could talk about mixes that don't particularly sound good, but have a vibe, like the Stooges' Raw Power. When you listen to that album, it's one of those albums, and I think I heard Warren say this. He said something like, it's one of my favorite albums that doesn't sound good. Like, in other words, sonically, it doesn't sound good. It's an amazing sounding album from a perspective of emotion and just oomph. But the guitar solo is approximately 6 dB too loud when the lead guitar, when it comes in. It's just, I remember him saying something like that. And anybody who hears that album knows exactly what we're talking about. You don't even really, it's not really, the guitar comes in like crazy loud and it ducks the entire rest of the band when it does. But it has something. Now, we could contrast this for a second, because I like to sometimes play devil's advocate with myself. And sometimes you get something like The Color and the Shape, Foo Fighters album, which I discussed not too long ago also. And there's a magic to that album that sounds particularly clean, because it sounds so clean and defined, and everybody knew exactly what they were playing, because they essentially had to record the entire album again. And sometimes what will happen is, this is what I think anyway, when you know something like the back of your hand and doing it again is just a matter of, we have to do this again, there's no choice. What winds up happening is your anger about doing that, combined with the fact that you know it really well, could yield an amazing performance. But I guarantee you what they didn't do on something like that was record every song like 15 times. They didn't do that. They knew what they were going to do, and they went in, and they may have really quickly been able to everybody knew their part. And we're talking about quick. It was able to be done quickly because they knew it so well. And because it happens to be Dave Grohl and that crew in the Foo Fighters that is a wrecking crew of musicians, it got done incredibly well. Would the demos have been better in terms of emotion, vibe? We will never know. And that's not really important, because what they did was great. But what I'm telling you is, more often than not, people wind up doing the opposite when they try to recreate something better. And I can tell you this, that entire crew, everybody involved on that, if they didn't beat what was done before in terms of emotion and power, they would have definitely gone back to doing either to just, they would have done it again until they did, or they would have just used the old stuff. Now, I don't remember exactly why they did it again. It's possible they couldn't use the stuff that was basically all recorded prior to that. I don't remember the exact details, but I could tell you that there's no way that anybody working on that didn't know what it means to put emotion into songs and would allow something to be released that's void of it in pursuit of perfection. That's not what they would do. So everybody should remember that that's a very weird circumstance that I think a lot of us are never going to have the luxury of loved being a part of. We will more often than not make our stuff way, way worse by trying to make it better constantly. So, Steve Albini also said something about this that I love. He said, Kurt went in very prepared as a vocalist when on the In Utero album, knocked it out right away, quickly. Couple, one or two takes kind of quickly, all right? A couple takes. Everybody knew their part, played it, couple takes, done. Because and this is what he said, people who are confident, they don't need tons of performances. They don't need to comp the best word here and there. It takes a confidence to know that this is how I sound. And me performing it and putting my all in at that moment, I turn it on, I perform it, and then it's not going to be better on the 30th time. It's not going to be better if we take the best syllable of every word. It's only going to ruin the performance completely. Steve Albini had another great analogy of this. He's like, you walk in and see a beautiful woman naked on the bed. What do? Your body's going to have a reaction. You're going to start to feel something instantly. That woman may be beautiful. She may have a flaw somewhere or whatever. It makes her human, and she's just a beautiful woman, and that's how you appreciate it. If you were to take a beautiful leg off one woman and a beautiful arm off another one and a shoulder off another one and the forehead off another one and the nose and you combine that and put it on the bed, you'd walk in and go, you know what I'm saying? What the hell is that? It would look crazy. And that's, I think, a point that nobody really wants to own up to is you combining all this nonsense stuff and trying to make the perfect performance of everything. It's just never going to have the emotional reaction as it would have if it was just the raw you. And that first take is the raw you. That first time you record it, you are giving it more energy. You're giving it a different flavor than you do every other time. And a lot of people never, ever let that first thing go. So every version of themselves that they put out is some weird, sterilized version of who they really are, because they're not confident enough in who they really are to realize the first time they did it was the best, no matter how it was done. Some of my favorite albums were recorded very poorly. Some of my favorite albums were the rough mixes that were released or the first time it was recorded. And I think the more you research this kind of stuff, the more you'll figure out the same thing. So anyway, I hope you guys get where I'm laying down over here, because it's something that you don't get this kind of awareness when you're young. It takes a long time. And if you do have this understanding when you're young, you're a very confident person, if that's the case. Go with that. Because I have, a lot of times just being, a lot of us aren't confident until a certain point. And sometimes we're never confident, and we have to always kind of build ourselves up to that. Well, so it may be harder for you to do this, but you can absolutely do it. It all just comes down to forcing yourself to do the things you don't want to do, like showing people who you really are the first time, exposing your imperfections. Your imperfections make you special to listen to. It's not the things the singer can do. It's what they can't do and how they navigate that makes them unique. It's the same on every instrument. You could do an instrumental track, and it's special because of what the people can't do, even more so than what they can. So this is something we should all be doing and having fun while we're doing it. And wouldn't it be more fun to not beat something up and into the ground because you think it's not perfect yet? It's not supposed to be perfect. Go with that first thing. Leave a comment, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.